Okay, everyone, it is now 12:05, so we're going to get started. So this is a webinar that is a rerun of a session that was held at Inspire 2019 in London a couple of weeks ago. The title of the session is Tired of Waiting, How the InDatabase Tools Help You Maximize Workflow Efficiency. So we're going to be going through the InDatabase tools that are available in Alteryx, and we'll be doing a workflow to show you how they can work. So if we get started. So first off is my name is Louise OBrien. I am a member of the data school at the Information Lab, so I'm a consultant and I've been using Alteryx since 2018. These are these little slides that they gave us at Inspire to help us introduce ourselves. So with Alteryx, I can turn people's work lives upside down in a good way. I can make their work more efficient. And when I use Alteryx, I do definitely feel like I can work faster than I think. As well as this being presented at my first Inspire conference, this is actually the first webinar I've done. So please bear with patience if I skip over things or if I mess something up. So if you have a question or something like that, it's really easy to ask in that there's a chat window interface in this webinar. So if you write me a question, so you should be able to see a chat item here, and that I'll be able to see it and we'll let you know the answer. If I could ask people to keep questions about the InDatabase tools to the end, we'll do a Q&A at the end. So what is our problem? So our problem is that we've been approached by Transport for London to perform an analysis of their cycling network. The purpose of the analysis is to allow them to understand the bike points which are currently under or over capacity compared with their predicted use in the next hour. So I used to work for Transport for London, which is why this tutorial is about the bikes. The bike network is a docked system that we have here in the city. So we have docks at these points that you can see on this visualization. And as the docks move around, people obviously they have to pick up a bike from a dock and drop it off at a dock. But sometimes there's not enough spaces, so you have to find another dock to drop your bike off, or you approach a dock and there's no bikes there. So this is something that TfL are trying to optimize. So today's agenda that we'll be doing is that we'll be understanding how the InDatabase tools work. I'll show you how to create an InDatabase connection, and then we'll get hands-on with the InDatabase tools. If you want to, you can play along, because that's what we did in the session at Inspire, but otherwise the materials for this session will be available on Meetup, so I'll post them to Meetup early next week, so you can have a bit more look about what we were doing. So to start with, let's have a look at the InDatabase tools. So when using the InDatabase tools, you're leveraging the power of your database to perform your work stream rather than your local computer. And there are 16 InDatabase tools that are all dark blue, and they're all kept together in their own palette because they only work with each other. This is signified by the fact that when we get to Alteryx Designer, you'll see that they have different connectors that are thicker than normal. And they also have different anchor points because theirs are blue, whereas a normal anchor point is green or white. You can connect the tools to the rest of Alteryx's tools by streaming the data out of the database, but this effectively means that you're streaming it into your machine, which means that often you want to do as much in database processing as you can if you're working with really large data sets before you have to stream it into your machine because you're streaming it in locally. So the InDatabase tools are useful because when shifting the workflow from your local machine to your database, the database is probably better at handling it in that it's more optimized to hold and process data. You know, it doesn't have to, it's not having its processing power mopped up by one of your Slack chats, having loads of GIFs in and all that kind of thing. So that's why it's a really good idea to use the InDatabase tools if you're working with a lot of data. Particularly if you're doing exploratory workflows, so you're doing some analysis and you're not necessarily sure where it's going. That means you might be rerunning the tools a lot. And as we know, one of the most time-consuming parts about a data connection sometimes is streaming it in to Alteryx in the first place, so streaming it in locally. This is particularly because if your database is under heavy load, or if you're working wirelessly, then, or if you just have issues between the connection between the database and your machine, then it can take even longer to stream in. So although they aren't in the tool palette, there are actually predictive tools available with certain databases, allowing you to do complex analysis with the InDatabase tools as well. So in a nutshell, there are 6 predictive tools available to work with if you're working with MS SQL Server, 3 with Oracle, and 3 with Teradata. You can also create macros with the InDatabase tools and dynamically generate queries with them. So some of the limitations of the tools is that the InDatabase tools work with most but not all database systems, in that if you're working with something very new, then the connections and drivers between Alteryx and that database may not have been set up yet. Secondly, you're shifting the workload from your local machine to your cloud machine or to your server, but that doesn't mean the workload is going away. So if you're executing really complex queries, or if you don't have a lot of kind of spare bandwidth in order to execute them in the machine, you might, you or indeed other users might notice that the other queries that other users may be doing will take longer. This is only if you have a very complex query and your IT department are very savvy about controlling the compute resources that your machines use. And lastly, a lot of the InDatabase tools cover preparation steps, but they don't cover all Alteryx tools. So there are some tools which do not have an InDatabase equivalent. So on to the next slide. We're just going to preview the data that we're using. So our snapshots of our bike points are taken every half an hour from an API, which is the one up here, this first table. The second database that we'll be using is our point information, in that we have, in our first table, we have our bike point ID, but in our second table, we actually have information about the bike point, like where it is and what's it called, and that sort of thing. And the third thing is our forecast that's been generated by one of our colleagues in a YXDB file. Some of you who are really eagle-eyed will notice that there is quite a difference between the date formatting between these tables, particularly the forecast and snapshots and point information. So that will be one of the problems that we solve when we're going through our workflow. So the first thing that I'm actually going to do is show you how to generate an InDatabase file connection. So we have some information in the rest of this PowerPoint slideshow that will also be saved to Meetup, so that way you can have a look yourselves afterwards. But right now I'm going to show you how to do it. So if we come out of here and go into Designer, so to create an InDatabase connection is really easy. So we have our database tools up here, and we just want the one that's called Connect in DB. So if we drag that on here, you can see it's asking us for a connection name. So if we click on the little caret down here, you can see that we can open some connections, and we have some manage file connections. So you can see here all my practice connections that I've used, and we just want to manage a connection to build a new one. So the first question that we have to ask is our data source. So our servers are held on an AWS instance, but they're actually MS SQL Server. So data source doesn't refer to kind of where the data is, it's referring to the management system that you're using to hold the data. So our data is MS SQL Server, and our connection type is a file type. So the difference between a user and a file type of connection is that a user connection is pretty much only for that user, because for another user to use it, their drivers and DSN systems have to be set up in exactly the same way and call exactly the same thing. However, if we use a file connection, if we want to upload our workflow to server or to share it with somebody else, then the file connection can be packaged as an asset with the workflow in the same way that we might package an asset if we were building a macro. So we want to have a file connection, And here it says, specify the connection file. So our connection file, if I just go to my desktop, and our connection is going to be called Louise InDB1. You can see here the file type is InDatabase connection settings file, so INDBC, which is the clearest of all Alteryx file extensions. So if we click open, even though this really means save as, so we have SQL Server OLEDB, and then we want to compose our connection string. So I know the details of our connection, but I don't necessarily know how to put them all together because I don't memorize how to do connection strings very often. So if we go to our little caret again, we can say new database connection. And this provides you a data link in order to build the connection in order to build the string. So that's the driver that we're using. That's great. And then we click next, and it says enter a server name. So our server, in this case, is called inspire19.til.bi, and our username is attendee, and our password is im, and it asks us to select a database on the server. So the database that we want is called Inspire19. So if we test the connection, test connection succeeded. Okay, great, cool. That means it works, and we click OK. So if I click apply, it then asks me about write drivers. So you can see above where it asks me to specify the driver, we have read and write. And even though this attendee connection is only a read-only driver, because we won't be writing back to our database in this tutorial, we still have to specify a write driver because Alteryx doesn't know it's read-only. So if we click OK, and then if we go to write, our connection string, oh no, do we have to do that again? Ooh. Nope, we can just click that it is the same as the read driver. So then we click apply, and then we click OK. So this is asking us if we want to exist. This essentially means just we want to save over it. So we click OK. So this means I've got the password wrong. So even though the connection was tested okay, it does the password authentication on the next step. So if I want to edit that, I can go to Manage Connections, and it's still looking at the what we've got here. And if I go to the connection string and I click Edit Database Connection, then I can go to Connection. So, I didn't mean to press that. Bear with me 1 second. The other thing that's really great about having a file connection is that means that you aren't tripping over people using different keyboards, like in my case, which means that sometimes I will get the key wrong. So we want inspire19.til.bi, and our username attendee, and our password is and the database that we want is Inspire19, and I'm going to try and save the password this time. So it says connection okay, looks okay, click apply, click OK, replace the existing connection, and this time it worked. Whew. Relief. So you can see when the connection is complete, it brings us up to the choose table or specify query panel that we're used to seeing within Alteryx. And we can have a look at our database over here if we want to. So in this case, we're going to jump straight into having a look at the overview of the workflow that we're going to build. So we can just click OK because we're not going to need that. So if I look at the starting workflow, if I look at the complete workflow, sorry, I've already run this this morning. So the first thing that we're going to have a look at is the whole thing. You can see it's actually not very long, but it does showcase a lot of the tools that we can use. So the first thing that we need to do is that we need to read in the transaction byte point table. And you can see here, we have already specified a connection name. So for our workflow, the connection is AWS, and it says select historic byte point or all of them. from the historic breakpoint, and we have a browser afterwards to see the data that we've got. So, yep, this looks like last week actually, but okay. So that allows us to see the first 100 records that we can see in the database. But if we want to get a count of all the records in the database, we can have a look at the summarize tool here. Now, unlike standard Alteryx, the one thing that makes the InDB tools really fast is that it doesn't generate data previews. So that's why you can see all these blue browse tools. So if we just zoom in slightly, so you can see our anchors are different and our browse tool is also different. So at the moment, we have about 3 million records in our database, but our problem is essentially a real-time problem. So our case would be streaming in a lot of data that, quite frankly, we don't need. So the second thing that we do is we apply an in-database filter to get the latest records only, and then we do an in-database formula because people who are really eagle-eyed will notice something different about the forecast of the bikes and actually the data set that we've got, because we have to calculate how many bikes we've got. The second thing that we do is we do an in-database join, which is here. So this joins our table information to our bike point. So if I just have a look at this tool, so that way you can see something about how it looks that we will have a look at later. So after the join, we then need a select tool because there are no embedded select tools within the in-database joins. But before we do the select tool and before we stream the data out, we actually want to have a look at the query that's being sent to the database. So some people might think, but why on earth would you ever want to see the query? So when I was at work last week, I literally had a problem where I was doing some in-database work and it had to be ported over to some of our database administrators because there was an issue with it. And I did actually have to use the query tool to view the query that's being sent to the database. So we'll do that as well. So after that, we'll stream the data out, add a formula tool in order to change some of our columns in order to match with our forecast okay. And then we will merge with the forecasting data, and then we will identify stations above and below the forecast. So if that makes sense to everyone, we can now get started. So if we look at our starting workflow, then you can see that we have 3 of our inputs here. So the read in the bike point and the input forecast data, but we don't have the transactional table. So we want to add a connect InDB tool here. And we want to add a connection. So this is a file connection that we're going to use that's already made. So it's this really long one called AWS connection. And the table that we want is historical bike point. Ooh. Cool, thanks for your question, Mart. I will come back to this at the end of the session. So we just want to have a look at the all the records. So we just click start because our table as it's being written at the moment is pretty lean. So if we click OK, then if we click run, Alteryx chimed at me, which means that it's finished running. If we click on the canvas, we know it's run and it's only taken 0.6 seconds. But if we click on an output anchor, then nothing happens. So this is why it's really useful to have those browse tools, because otherwise we can't necessarily see what's going on. So if we add a browse after and we run it again, not sure why it's taking slightly longer on the second run, but we have 100 records displayed of some pretty recent data. So we want to get a count of the records in the source table. So we go to our InDatabase Tools palette and we look at Summarize InDB. So we drag that onto the canvas and connect the data connection to the Summarize tool. So to get a count of the amount of data that we have, we just want to count any field. So if we count our ID fields, so we click add and count, and then again we add a browse tool because it is the InDatabase Tools, and we run it. Ta-da! So we have, like we saw earlier, about 3 million records. So now we want to do a filter to get the latest records only. So if we go up to the InDatabase Tools, we have a filter in DB here. So if we pull that over and connect it. So for those of you who are really familiar with SQL, this will be a relief to you. I am not Captain SQL, so it's a little bit harder for me. But the formula and filter tools that we use if we want to do a custom filter in our data is that we have to match the syntax of the database we're using. So here I can't put in a custom filter using Alteryx syntax. I have to use Microsoft SQL Server syntax. So because I haven't got a great memory for SQL items, I do actually have a little cheat sheet. So our filter function here is our date time add. So if we go to our custom filter, you can see date add is not a function in Alteryx, it's a function in SQL. So our custom filter, so we want to look at date time, and we want that to be greater than date add, so minus 60, which is the last hour, minutes. Have I got that in the right order? No, it's minutes first. Okay, I'm glad I checked that. Okay, so we want it in minutes, minus 60, and then for our current date time. So we know that in Alteryx we have features like date time now or date time today in order to extract that, but in SQL we want the feature current timestamp. I know some people kind of have debates about whether or not it should be current timestamp or get date, but we just want current timestamp. So you can see down here it validates the expression here at runtime because otherwise the errors will appear at the end of the workflow. Because the in-database workflows tend to be pretty quick, that's not too bad, but here it's really helpful. So we run it again. And we know it's finished, and we know that we've had no errors, but this is where I find that the obstacle for the in-database workflows really appears because people are not used to working with something that they can't kind of constantly see what they're doing. So if people have a background of using SQL or indeed R or Python or any kind of coding language to do their database queries, I have a background in R and Python, then eventually you get used to not being able to see what you're doing unless you really specifically say to the machine, hey, show me my table. But for people who are really used to Alteryx or stuff like Tableau Prep and all that kind of thing, where you can see what you're doing pretty promptly, then I find that the greatest obstacle for the data using the in-database tools is not adding a browse after everything. Because if you add a browse after everything, then, well, it's going to defeat the point of doing the problem, because each browse will slow down your query. So the next thing that we wanted to do was add a formula tool. So if we have formula in DB here, and we want to add the true to our formula tool. So you can see that this looks a bit different from the normal formula tools that we have in Alteryx. In fact, it looks like how the formula tool used to look. So our output field will be number of bikes. So I'm just going to call it number of bikes. And our SQL expression is we're going to build fields. So our number of bikes should be calculated from our number of docs minus, because there's a plus coming, our number of empty docs plus our number of broken docs. And that should give us the result of the bikes that we have left. And then we want to add in all of our bike point data that we have from this tool down here. So if we go to our join in database tool, pull that over and connect this one on the left and this one on the right. So if we can remember, what's our common field is our ID field. So we're also keeping this as an inner join because we don't really want information for our real-time problem about docs that haven't had any activity kind of in the last hour or so. So one thing that you notice about this join tool, like I said earlier, is that it doesn't have an embedded select tool, and sometimes this can confuse people. I know that actually I've gotten confused the other way, and that's sometimes when I'm using the InDatabase tools a lot, and then I go back to using a normal join tool, that I forget that there is an embedded select. So we do our inner join, and then our next step was our select tool. So we add our select in DB here. Actually, I'm going to add it here. So the thing that we want to get rid of with our select tool is our second ID column here. But before we stream the data locally so it can be matched with the forecast data, the next thing that we're going to do is view the query that's being sent with a dynamic output tool. So dynamic output tool is up here. It looks like, to me, it kind of looks like some biscuits in a jar, but it's over here. So we drag in our dynamic output, and you can see that for the dynamic output, the input anchor is blue, but the output anchor is green. So this is Alteryx telling you, making it really clear that it is now streaming data out of the database. And the thing that we actually want to do is stream out the query. So you can see here we have some output fields. We have our query and our connection name. We don't really want our connection name, so we can untag that one. And then if we just go from our select tool and connect, and from here, we just want to add a browse tool. So if we use our browse shortcut to add the tool, you can see that Alteryx will recognize it will match the right browse tool to the right output. So this one is green, unlike our previous ones, which are blue. So if I run this quickly, ta-da! So if I click on my browse tool and I have a look at the query, so hopefully people can see this. Right, hang on. Hopefully people can see that a bit better. So you can see with tool 64, select white point, and so on. So this is Alteryx's really chatty way of basically constructing a query, and each of those tool references refers to a temporary table that Alteryx is creating in order to do the query. So it's really important to remember that Alteryx generates temporary tables when using the InDatabase tools, because not all database management systems will allow read-only users to generate temporary tables. So Microsoft SQL is one that will do this, but I have heard that Oracle, for example, is one that would not. So if you were doing this generation, a couple of weeks ago, this happened to me at work as well, in that we were using Postgres tables, and Postgres systems also do not allow read-only users to generate temporary tables. So I had to go back to my DBA and ask them to change my sign-in privileges in order to give me access to generate these temporary tables in order to execute an in-database workflow. But if you were in a SQL IDE like Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio or Heidi SQL or one of those things, you could copy this query into those systems, run it, and it will work. So that's really, that I found is actually really helpful. So now that we've done the dynamic output, we're going to stream the data out of the database. So just realized that this one should be over here because this one's a bit long. So our data stream out is very close to our dynamic output database. So data stream out here. You can see, like the dynamic output, that this one also has a blue anchor and a green anchor. Make this slightly smaller. So we stream our data out. So our little error message was because we couldn't stream the data out. And one thing that you'll notice when you look along the top of the InDatabase Tools, so if I just zoom in a little bit, is that, like I said earlier, most of these tools are for data preparation. So filters, formulas, to a lesser extent joins, but also samples, select, and summarize. So the thing about that is that one really common missing tool is the sort tool, but you can sort records before streaming them out of the database if you need to. So we don't need to, so we're not going to, but just to let you know that there is sorting functionality there, even if it's not in its own tool. So the next thing that we're going to do is that we're going to generate our 2 new columns in our streamed out data in order to prepare to merge with the forecasting data. So because it's streamed out, we now go into the other tools. So we go to the preparation palette and we drag in a formula tool. It's connected, and the 2 fields that we needed were day and what was the other one? Day and time, that was it. Right. Because the forecast information that we have is for a given day of the week, but not a specific kind of date. And they are our forecast information is only hourly input. So we want to add a new column and we want to call it day. And the formula that we want will be for date time, but as a date time format. So if I just zoom in, so this is easier to read. So date time format with our date time variable. And the format that we want it in is capital A percentage sign. Ooh, sorry, this is just making it slightly harder for me to read what I'm doing. Is it the other way? Ah, it is the other way. I always get these the wrong way around. So it's percentage sign A, and that will give us a day. And then the other one that we want is the time. So another date time format with our date time field. And here we want hours, minutes, seconds. So we want percentage hour, percentage minutes, and semicolon, and percentage second. So we also want to change this because we want to add a new column called time. And we want to change this actually to a time field. So I'm just going to check that I've got this right, considering I got this one slightly in error with my little cheat sheet. So yeah, hour, minute, seconds, date time formats. Great. So once we have that, we can do our join with our input data. So if we go to our join tool, so we add this on, we add the data that we're streaming out of the database on the left and our input forecast on the right. So we want to join by ID, by day, and by time. And the last thing that we want to do is identify stations above and below our forecast. So this is a filter with a formula. So if we go to our preparation tools and go to filters, we bring it over, we zoom in here, and we want our custom filter. So again, I always get the more than or the less than the wrong way around. So I want to make sure I get a consistent result. So I'm going to copy this one in that we have our forecast and our number of bikes. So I haven't put a space in my number of bikes column, so I just take that out. And there's our custom filter. So if we run this, great. So these are the number of docking points that we have in the last hour where the forecast is less than or equal to the number of bikes. So there are ways that we could use this information is that we could use it to say build an app that would plug it into a visualization platform where our bike area managers on the ground or zone maintenance people could then use this information to smartly distribute the bikes, so they're alerted when there are too few bikes in a place or if there are too many. And as well as that, because it's an in-database tool, our colleague who generated our YXDB format, so we could approach him with a project to say, hey, we want to convert this into something dynamic. So that way we can do our forecasting with data that is, you know, in the last month or the last week. So that way we can have our forecast only using live data. For example, if we generated another workflow that used the in-database tools with predictive, or maybe even if we turn that into a macro. So that's us having generated our in-database tools workflow. Whew. Sorry if that was a little bit a mile a minute. But this, like I said earlier, this will be published on Meetups to allow you to have a look at the kind of stuff that we did. So does anybody have any questions? So I know that there was a couple of questions posted in the chat. So if I go to the chat here. Can everybody still hear me okay? Okay, great. Thank you very much. So if you're going to schedule this on server, would you use the in-database tools? So yes, I would, because we can use the file connection there to ensure that the server can access the database. And that means if it's scheduling, then when Alteryx runs the workflow as a schedule, that means the connection that is going to be used would be the file. So I'd say that's the main thing that would be the issue when switching between a local version of Designer and server, in that sometimes obviously the server doesn't tend to be a person. So if the database is authenticated with single sign-on, so for example with Windows sign-on, that would make it a bit of an issue to run on server unless you can enable your server to run as a particular user. So does anybody have any other questions? Before we finish, I'm going to show you some resources that I found really helpful when I was preparing this demo that we ran at Alteryx. So if I just jump over to Chrome. So one thing is one of my colleagues, Soha Elghani, she wrote a quick guide to the InDB tools part 1. So this is available on the Information Lab blog. And I found this really helpful because it's partly reiterating everything I've just said, but it goes into quite a lot of detail about every single tool that is available in the in-database tools. And secondly, would be the FAQ on the Alteryx community site. So this is written by somebody from Alteryx, who I think is a specialist in the in-database tools because he answers almost every question on the community about it. So it's an FAQ. So if you have extra questions, then it's really helpful. I'd say that the community is pretty responsive to questions, as everybody knows using Alteryx, but there aren't necessarily loads of people who have a lot of experience using the in-database tools, because it very much depends on the setup of your kind of like IT landscape to know whether or not you can actually use them. But they do make your work much faster, so I would highly recommend using them. Lastly, last chance for any questions. Anyone? Okay, so the last thing is thank you all very much for joining this webinar. I hope you found it really useful, and I hope you've learned a bit more about the in-database tools enough so that you can actually now start to play with them in your everyday work. Oh, thank you very much. So the last thing is that we are rerunning all of our Alteryx Inspire sessions. And I'm sure most of you are now part of this group because that's how you heard about this webinar. But the sessions at Inspire were heavily oversubscribed. So if you were attending and you missed out, or if you heard one of your colleagues raving about them, we are rerunning every single session, and every single session is also being recorded. So that means say you've got a meeting one lunchtime when some of them are on, we should be putting them up on our YouTube page pretty soon. And like I said earlier, we will also be sharing all of the materials, that's the right word, in the meetup group. So thank you all very much for joining. If you have any questions, then my email is here, or you can ping me on Twitter if you like. For those of you who didn't catch the URL for Let's Talk Data, there's a quick link here. So this is how you can find our meetup stuff quickly. Like I said earlier, there's a little bit of extra explanation about creating in-database connections and user and file-based connections in the presentation that will be uploaded to Meetup. And I wish you all a very happy Friday. Thank you, everyone.